as NPA, non-performing asset, under certain conditions. So Reserve Bank has a circular that lays out certain conditions under which a bank will classify a particular customer as an NPA. Now, after a company becomes an NPA, the bank or the creditor can approach a government authority for initiating insolvency process of this particular company. So creditors or banks that had given loans to Jet Airways approached NCLT, that is National Company Law Tribunal, that is the government authority for this purpose, to declare insolvency of Jet Airways. Now, this has happened to many companies. When this happens, NCLT will make sure that there is a default of loan and it meets certain other criteria. And when NCLT is satisfied that these criteria are met, NCLT will declare insolvency of this company. So Jet Airways, for example, has gone under insolvency. Now, when insolvency is declared for a particular company, the implications are the NCLT, the government authority, will also appoint what we call a resolution process professional. In the first instance, it is called interim resolution professional. Now, interim resolution professional, or subsequently a resolution professional, is appointed, is a person like me who is a qualified insolvency professional and registered with the government authority called IBBI. I will talk about IBBI a little later. So we have to pass an exam. We have to have certain kind of requisite education and experience. And after passing this exam, we can apply for membership of this particular IBBI. So the government appoints somebody like us. After somebody like us is appointed, the existing board of directors will not have any authority over the company. This is a very, very important implication. The erstwhile board of directors, or the board of directors that ran the company till date of the NCLT order, will not have authority to run the company, but the insolvency professional will have the authority, including bank accounts and everything else. Subsequently, the insolvency professional is expected to find some buyers for this company. So the insolvency professional of Jet Airways is trying to find who can buy this company as a going concern, as a running company. Now, when a company is sold as a going concern, the jobs are protected, the business is protected, the industry is protected, and the economy can move on. Now, in such cases, therefore, the objective of the law, as well as objective of the government and the parliament, is to try and run the sell this company as it is. Now, this resolution professional or interim resolution professional also has to assess how much money does this company owe to the creditors. So the resolution professional of Jet Airways had to assess or calculate which creditors have given money to this company. Jet Airways owes money to which creditors, including banks, financial institutions, suppliers, employees, and so on. We'll look at the list a little later. Now, if the resolution professional cannot find a buyer for this company in a certain time limit, so there is a time limit specified to everything in this law. And this is how one of the reasons why this law is different from the other, from the earlier provisions. If the resolution professional cannot find any buyer within the time limit, the company has to be liquidated. Now, for liquidation purpose, the government may appoint another person, another resolution professional like us, as a liquidator of this company. And the liquidator has to once again assess the claims. So this company owes money to which all parties. That sum total, that those calculations are made. and the liquidator is expected to sell assets of this company, and whatever money is received, that money will be disbursed in the manner specified by the insolvency code itself. Now, liquidation also has a time limit. So everything in this law is a time-bound activity. So this is how the new scheme works, and this is what an insolvency professional is all about. I thought I'll give a little introduction in terms of what is an insolvency code all about, and what was the requirement for this anyway. Because government keeps on passing many laws, most of the governments do not worry about getting rid of many outdated laws, and I think all of us are suffering from many outdated laws that still exist in our legal system. Now, given this, let me start on the topic, on the introduction, in terms of, I'm sharing my screen now so that we can see the presentation. All right. Okay, no, I'm not able to make it up. First of all, we are all business people. We are running some kind of industry in Thane or nearby. So what is the relevance for us anyway? So many laws are being passed. What is the relevance of this particular act on us? Now, I will suggest three particular points for relevance. One is, in case any of your customers are not paying the due amount to you, IBC can be one of the powerful tools to file a case in NCLT. In case of Jet Airways, I mentioned about a bank. Now, likewise, the code has a category called operational creditors. So some of us who have supplied some kind of goods or services to a particular customer, and this customer is not paying way beyond the due date, despite reminders and so on, we can file an application to NCLT under certain conditions. I will discuss those conditions a little later. Secondly, this gives a big opportunity for us because these days there are many companies going under NCLT. Now, for the year 2021 financial year, practically new cases are not going to come because of the moratorium due to Corona. But once this moratorium is lifted, it has been extended till 25th of March 2021. Once it is lifted or once it is unoperational, it is possible that more and more cases can come. And when such cases are coming, even today, there are many companies that are going under insolvency, wherever the defaults were before 25th of March 2020. Now, in case you would like to grow by acquiring businesses, this can be a good opportunity. We'll also discuss this a little later. Thirdly, if you get a notice under IBC's section 8, how do we need to respond to that particular notice? So some of these implications I will discuss towards the end of the presentation. But right now, let me explain the broad provisions and the important provisions that are relevant to us of the code. Now, one point I would like to start with is, why do we need this IBC? We had a company law, we had a lot of other regulations. We had an act called Recovery of Debts due to Banks and other financial institutions. That was one 1993 law. Then we had SARFAESI. That was another law. Now, these laws were also trying to serve the same purpose, that many NPA cases or many cases where the loans have not been repaid and there were defaults and many assets were getting blocked. The banks were not getting their money. The suppliers were not getting their money. So what is the need for this code? So first of all, there was no single law dealing with insolvency and bankruptcy dealing with in India till IBC came into force in 2016. The jurisdiction of various authorities was overlapping. Like under company law and under SARFAESI and other provisions, there was DRT, that is Debt Recovery Tribunal. There was NCLT existing anyway. There are our normal civil courts. They also had a lot of authority. Now, IBC basically has classified and sorted out this issue by saying that courts will not have jurisdiction in almost all cases dealing with insolvency or bankruptcy once the insolvency process starts for a particular business. So under IBC, the exclusive jurisdiction is to the NCLT, which is the National Company Law Tribunal, in cases of companies and in cases of limited partnerships. And in the other cases, that is individuals and unlimited partnerships, or the old type of 1932 Act partnerships, the jurisdiction is to DRT, that is the Debt Recovery Tribunal. High courts have jurisdiction only in cases of writ petitions under 226, Article 226 of the Constitution. And of course, Supreme Court has jurisdiction in cases of Article 32 of the Constitution, fundamental rights, plus the writs, the various writs that can be filed, plus Supreme Court is also the appellate, the final has the appellate jurisdiction after NCLAT. So the starting point of any case in this case is National Company Law Tribunal. An appeal can be made to NCLAT, that is National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, and appeal against these decisions can be made to the Supreme Court. Jurisdiction of every other authority is curtailed because of this act. And in fact, the law also says that the existing cases in case of winding up and so on are almost in all cases are being transferred to NCLT. Earlier, the process was very, very slow. It used to take minimum 5 years. Now, even 5 years seems to be a very long time. In fact, I was talking to a company law official who was also serving as official liquidator and so on. He mentioned that in his case, in his career of 26 years, he never saw a single company being closed down, not a single case. Now, in a matter of 20, 25, 30 years, if the cases are not getting resolved, a lot of money is blocked in these assets. I used to see, in fact, one textile mill near our Cheknaka, and a lot of real estate getting blocked. If these assets are released, they can add value to the economy. Somebody else can run these units. Employment can get generated. Some government can get some tax revenue, and the economic machine can carry on. And that is why there was a need for this particular legislation. So there were other consequential issues like recovery rate was very low, NPAs like sitting in banks' books and so on. The process cost of insolvency was very high and so on. Of course, one of the reasons why this law was passed and the regulations made, all of us know that about 2017 and 2018, India's rank in terms of ease of doing business jumped very significantly. And one of the reasons was this insolvency code. So after India passed the insolvency code and the regulations, India's ranking of ease of doing business has increased dramatically. Little bit of history of this story. I mean, there were a lot of committees appointed for this purpose, joint committees and so on. I suppose they do not have too much relevance for this audience, but for interpretation of the particular code, these will have relevance because there are many ambiguous areas in this code right now. One important point, let me mention about the code is still evolving. After 2016, after the introduction in 2016, there have been a lot of amendments in the code. As this is a new law and there are a lot of gray areas or ambiguities in the law. I'm sure all of you are looking at what is happening to GST. GST is also undergoing a lot of changes, and people are still trying to figure out what is going to happen to this and that. Likewise, when there is a new law, there are likely to be some ambiguities existing in the beginning of the period, and they will be getting sorted out over a period of time. Now, applicability of insolvency code, as I said, this is a very comprehensive legislation, and therefore, who all does it apply to? Any company incorporated under the Companies Act 2013, or even the earlier Act, the 1956, and so on. Any other company that is governed by any special act. So government may have enacted special acts, and some companies have come into existence. Limited liability partnership. So we had this act, and in 2008 called Limited Liability Partnership Act. And any partnerships incorporated under this act, the law applies. Then any other body as notified by the central government, till date I have not seen any such government, any notification yet. Partnership firms under the 1932 Act. So what we call unlimited partnerships, the earlier avatar of partnership firms, they are also covered under the IBC, and individuals are also covered. Now, partnership firms and individuals, those provisions have not been notified yet. So right now, what has been notified is provisions applicable to companies and limited liability partnerships. And as I mentioned earlier, the adjudicating authority or the law-related authority for these two entities, companies governed under the Companies Act and limited liability partnerships, the adjudicating authority is National Company Law Tribunal. Whereas for partnerships and individuals, the relevant authority is DRT, that is Debt Recovery Tribunal. But those sections have not yet been notified. But there is one more category of people, individuals who have given corporate guarantees. So individuals who have given corporate guarantees, I'm sure you have heard the case of Mr. Ambani. So individuals who have given guarantee to corporates, I mean, it's a normal practice that directors may give guarantee to the loans taken by a particular company. Now they are covered by the sections that are notified. They are covered by the virtue of the fact that a particular company has gone under insolvency. So if a company has gone under insolvency, like Jet Airways, even those individuals who have given guarantee to this corporate body will be covered, and they are covered even under the present law, and they are answerable. Action can be taken against those individuals. And this, of course, matter is right now in the Supreme Court and so on. So people are trying to fight it out. And as I said, because the law is new, these probably are the first cases that have come up in terms of the insolvency relating to individuals who have given guarantee to corporate bodies. But individuals who have taken loans and have defaulted, those sections have not been notified yet under the insolvency code. Although the banks can proceed against them under the SARFAESI Act, and there is one act called RDDB, Recovery of Debts Due to Banks and Financial Institutions. So that's the applicability. I'm not getting into the objects right now because it's too much of an introduction. Basic terms, all of you probably know most of the terms by now. Creditor and debtor, of course, are known. So creditors are those entities who have given some kind of money to this particular company. Now the company under insolvency or liquidation is called corporate debtor. Corporate debtor. So to whosoever the corporate debtor owes money will be a creditor. To whosoever Jet Airways owes money will be a creditor. Now creditors have multiple categories. So there are financial creditors, then there are operational creditors, then there are what we call other creditors. So these three main categories. Under financial creditors, you can have secured creditors or unsecured creditors. Under operational categories, you have companies like ours, like that is who are supplying some kind of goods and services. Also, there are employees and workmen, and there are government debts, if any. Is an entity that owes money to this corporate debtor. Now, insolvency is where the company has been declared under insolvency by the NCLT, and the provisions of insolvency sections have started applying. In respect, the term bankruptcy, we use it for individuals and unlimited partnerships, that the partnerships under the 1932 Act, which are similarly, which have gone under, which have defaulted, and against whom the DRT have declared bankruptcy proceedings. Now, winding up, liquidation, and dissolution are basically the terms, they come from the Companies Act. They have various shades of basically the closure of a particular company. Dissolution is typically the last stage where the name of a company is struck off from the register of companies. As all of you know, the ROC keeps register of companies, and at some point of time, the ROC will strike off the name of the company from the register. Even after striking off under certain conditions, up to I think period of 20 years, the name can be resurrected up, and if any matters are pending or so, the matter can the company can be brought to existence. But these are very, very rare cases. Once the company is dissolved, typically there is no evidence of existence of a particular company. Who can invoke, who can initiate proceedings under the code? As I said earlier, some certain banks approached NCLT so that the Jet Airways should be declared as insolvent company, and insolvency proceedings should start against Jet Airways. Now, banks are not the only ones who can start who can initiate the process of insolvency, but banks fall under under the category called financial creditors. So we have these three categories of entities that can initiate this process of insolvency. So financial creditors are those to whom the corporate debtor will owe what we call financial debt. Now, financial debt has a little complicated definition, and a lot of cases are still happening in terms of getting clarity under who is a financial creditor. For example, recently, so financial creditor is basically who has given you some kind of loan. Now, the loan can be secured or unsecured. Now, who is a secured creditor is a little is again getting debated and is again getting sorted out. For example, in a recent case, there was a case where a motor car, a car was mortgaged to a car. The car was given as a security to a bank. So bank had financed the car, and the car was kind of the loan was secured with the asset called car. Now the car is duly registered. Car has to be registered under the Motor Vehicles Act, and the RTO also had registered the loan. The RTO had registered that the person who is using the car, the borrower, owes money to a particular bank. Now, when this company went into insolvency, the authorities took a view that this particular asset was not registered as a secured loan or as a security under the company law. And therefore, this particular entity is not a financial creditor. And that amount of loan will not be taken as a financial credit. Now, that's a matter still under legal scrutiny. I think this judgment was given by NCLAT, so I think the matter might go higher up. So, what is a financial debt and what is not a financial debt? What is an operational debt? What is not an operational debt? So, these are little tricky situations. But by and large, for our understanding, loan taken from a bank, whether it is secured or unsecured, will fall under financial credit, financial debt. Now, financial debt, as I said, can have both the criteria, secured as well as unsecured. Now, if you are a finance company and if you are giving loan to another entity, the implication is you must register this loan under the Companies Act. This security will have to be registered. The charge has to be created under the Companies Act. Otherwise, it can be challenged in NCLT or some other authority. So second category, as I mentioned, is so financial creditors will initiate under Section 7. An operational creditor, say suppliers like us, we have supplied some goods or services to a particular company, and that company has defaulted. In such cases, we have to issue a notice to the particular creditor, give them a time of 10 days, and after 10 days, if there is no satisfactory resolution, or if there is no dispute raised by the particular customer of ours, we can approach NCLT under certain conditions. Now, those conditions, one of the most important conditions is the amount of money that this corporate debtor owes you. As per the present provisions, this money has to be more than 1 crore. When the code started, it was 1 lakh. Now, I think post-COVID, it has been raised to 1 crore. So if a customer owes you more than 1 crore or 1 crore or more, you can issue a demand notice under Section 8. And if you don't hear from this corporate debtor, you can approach NCLT to declare initiation of insolvency of this particular corporate debtor. Of course, there are a lot of procedures for this. There has to be a demand notice in a certain format. The corporate debtor also has to be given a copy of the demand notice, and there should be no dispute existing as on date of your notice. If there is a dispute, the customer comes back and says, no, this is disputed. You have given us defective goods, and therefore we are not supposed to pay you. Then the NCLT may not admit your application for insolvency of this particular debtor. But thirdly, the company itself can approach NCLT for initiation of their insolvency. So if a company decides, or if a company has determined that they are unable to pay their debts, the company itself can approach the NCLT. There are, of course, multiple conditions. There have to be shareholder resolutions, and there have to be creditors' approval, and so on. For each of these three entities who can invoke the code, there are many procedural conditions and there are many time limits. And there is a minimum threshold criteria that has to be met. Now, interestingly, when they say 1 crore, for financial creditors, they can combine this 1 crore. So, for example, if I'm a financial creditor to a certain company and this company owes me 50 lakhs, I can find another financial creditor to whom this company owes 60 lakhs, and together we can file an application saying the default is more than 1 crore. But as of now, it doesn't seem to be available for operational creditors. So if a company owes you 50 lakhs and owes 50 lakhs to somebody else, at least as of now, there is no provision to combine the two and say, yeah, now it is 1 crore and we are filing an application. Maybe in future, this issue may also get sorted out. All right. Now, invoking this provisions of this default, as I said, there has to be a default in the first case. So there has to be a default in the sense money has to be due and unpaid. So a loan installment was due on a certain date and it was not paid, and subsequently the bank classified it as an NPA. Or let us say you are a supplier, you have given some, you have supplied some goods to an entity. That entity owes you some money, say 2 crores of rupees for that supply. And the due date of this payment is so and so, is let us say 31st of January. And the party has not paid as of 31st January. You have sent some reminders and so on. You have tried your best even before approaching or invoking IBC. you have tried your best to recover that money from this customer, but the customer has not paid. Now, the default in case of company and LLP, the minimum amount, as I said, is 1 crore. In case of partnership and individuals, the minimum amount is 1,000 rupees. Now, this is as of now. The partnership and individuals, as I said, is not notified yet. So by the time I think they notified, the amounts may change. 1,000 appears to be a pretty small amount. So when a company or LLP commits any default in paying its financial debt or operational debt, then the financial creditor or operational creditor or a company or LLP itself can make an application to NCLT to initiate insolvency process with the adjudicating authority. Now, adjudicating authority, as I said, is NCLT in this case, National Company Law Tribunal. I mentioned this briefly. Adjudicating authority is National Company Law Tribunal that deals with insolvency matters of companies, the limited companies and limited liability partnerships. And in appeal in cases of decisions against NCLT can be made to NCLAT, National Company Law Appellate Tribunal. In case of individuals and partnership firms, the adjudicating authority is Debt Recovery Tribunal, and the appeal can be made to Debt Recovery Appellate Tribunal. Now, in both cases, appeal against NCLAT and appeal against DRAT under certain conditions can be made only to the Supreme Court. As I said, high courts or the other courts practically have no jurisdiction in such cases other than high court jurisdiction of the rate that we call Article 226. Now, the authority may reject, Company Law Tribunal may reject our application if the application is incomplete, if there is a dispute, and if there is no default. Now, let us see these two reasons. One is if the default has not occurred in case of a particular company, the company may come back and say that we are not defaulted, we are always paid on time, or we have paid, but maybe a little late, but we have paid. So there is no default as of now. Now, if it is established that there is no default, NCLT may reject our application. But for operational creditors, an important aspect is dispute. If your customer says, no, there is a dispute about the quality of these goods. No, there is a dispute that there was a breach of some contract. In fact, in one of the cases, the supplier had breached the non-disclosure agreement. And there was a dispute already raised by the customer by saying that you have breached the confidentiality and therefore we should not be paying you any money. But the important point is the dispute has to be existing before the notice. The customer cannot raise a dispute later on. Now, that is a protection for suppliers that there has to be an existence of dispute prior to the proceedings or prior to the notice of the particular issue given by the supplier to the particular customer. Of course, there are many cases and new interpretations have been coming out over a period of time. So we may have to really see how the case law really looks at these different situations. For example, if arbitration proceedings are already being conducted, it obviously means that there is a dispute. If the arbitration proceedings are pending, but appeal is being made, then it also means that there is a dispute and the dispute has not been conclusively closed. So there can be many shades and many varieties of possibilities that can come into existence. If application is incomplete, of course, the party which is applying under section 7 or 8 or 7 or 9 or 10 can always complete the application and resubmit the application. And once the authorities admit the application, the insolvency process of the particular corporate debtor or of the company starts. Now, once it starts, there are very, very important implications. Before these implications, let me come to the timeline. As I said, compared to the earlier company law provisions and so on, The IBC is time bound. So IBC has given 180 days for resolution of insolvency. There can be an extension of maximum 90 days. Therefore, the total time for resolution is 270 days. Now, 270 days meeting it in terms of practical provisions is very, very difficult. Now, also there are many litigations happening. So sometimes the litigations, because of the litigations, part of the litigation time can be excluded, which is what is practically happening. Also, the corona lockdown time is also getting excluded from this 270 days. There is a fast track resolution, which I will not talk about. I think very, very limited cases come under fast track resolution. Now, once the application is admitted, the NCLT will declare a moratorium. NCLT will also cause a public announcement, and NCLT will appoint interim resolution professional. Now, what does a moratorium do? Now, when a moratorium is announced, during the pendency of this insolvency process, so from the date of initiation of corporate insolvency process, basically all the pending suits, pending cases against this company, which may have been initiated by the company or by some other party, will not proceed further. So those cases will not proceed further. The company cannot initiate new cases. Other parties cannot initiate new cases against this company. So one company cannot get up and say, no, this company also owes us some money, so we are filing a case. Or there is a contractual breach and therefore we are filing a case. Or there is a labor dispute and then we are filing a case. So those cases cannot be started after initiation of CIRP, which is Corporate Insolvency Resolution Process. Then the company cannot transfer assets, cannot alienate assets, cannot create fresh charge, or cannot create beneficial interest unless it is specifically permitted by the procedure followed under the code. So the code has certain procedure under which, let us say, if the insolvency professional wants to, or the resolution professional wants to raise new money, and that additional money has to be is being approved by the committee of creditors, then in such cases it may be permitted. But barring that, transferring any assets or creating new interest is not allowed. Any foreclosure of loan, any recovery under SARFAESI Act, etc., will not be permitted. So once moratorium is into existence, all the pending suits will stop and new cases cannot be filed, in layman's terms. Also, it is important that the critical supplies to this business will have to be continued. So if there is a factory which has gone sick, which has gone under the insolvency process, the factory is running, but they are under insolvency process. In such cases, the necessary supplies to this factory will have to continue. So supply of water, supply of electricity, supply of internet, those supplies have to continue. If the office of the particular company is a leased office or is a rented office, this company cannot be evicted from these premises. Water supply, electricity supply, those supplies to this company will have to continue. Very, very important provisions. Otherwise, the purpose of the code, which is to try and sell a particular company as a running company, will get defeated. So the essential supplies to a particular company will always will have to continue. I also mentioned that once the insolvency process starts, there has to be a public announcement. Now, typically, the NCLT will appoint an insolvency interim resolution professional, and this professional is expected to make a public announcement in the newspapers, local language as well as English language and so on, the normal announcement process. And the one of the things that he does is, first of all, he announces that this company is under insolvency process. Secondly, this notice invites submission of claims. Now, I would like to tell you something important about the submission of claims. Now, this submission of claims has to be done in a time-bound manner. I think there are 14 days to submit your claim. So if one of your customers has gone under insolvency proceedings against whom moratorium has been announced, you have to submit your claim as to how much money is this company owing to you within a period of this 14 days. If you delay, the NCLT may not allow you to submit your claim. For the insolvency process, there is an additional period of or a total period of 90 days. In case of liquidation, there is only 1 month that is allowed to submit your claims. But the point is, if you are busy in your day-to-day work, and if you do not notice that one of your customers is undergoing insolvency process and they owe you a lot of money, if you do not submit your application in time, you may not be able to submit your claim at all. Now, NCLT may allow late submission, but in a very, very few cases, I think in cases of employees or workmen, they may be a little lenient, but in case of corporates, they probably are not. The resolution professional may refuse to admit your claim if it is submitted delayed, if it is submitted late. In case there is a false claim or in case there is a misleading claim, there is a penalty. So be careful in terms of whatever claims that you are submitting. Now, this interim resolution professional is appointed by NCLT initially, has a tenure of about 1 month. In most cases, they extend beyond 1 month till the normal resolution professional is appointed. But the law basically says that the intention of the law is that it should not exceed 30 days. The appointment is within 14 days and so on. So the point is, it's a very time-bound process, and the interim resolution process may or may not continue. One of the important things that the interim resolution professional does is they form a committee of creditors. Now, committee of creditors is the governing body or is the body is the that is in charge of whatever is happening, the decisions that are made in terms of the particular resolution process of a corporate debtor. Now, this committee of creditors basically consists of financial creditors, which are not related parties. So after receiving of claims, so the resolution professional is supposed to receive these claims. After receiving the claims, he has to verify these claims, which means he has to make sure that his claims are valid and correct. He also has to verify that that the securities that are claimed are also correct, are in order and registered under the company's law, and make a list of these creditors. Now, this list of creditors will be arranged in a descending manner, and a committee of creditor is formed based on the rules and regulations of the IBC or the code. Now, this committee of creditors basically has all the authority in terms of running the resolution process of the corporate debtor. For example, this committee of creditors can change the resolution professional if they don't like or if they're not happy with the performance of or the proceedings of the resolutions. They may apply to change a particular resolution professional. Now, there are many situations where the resolution professional requires permission of the committee of creditors to perform certain acts. For example, if the resolution professional wants to raise money as a say working capital beyond a certain limit. So for raising money, the COC permission is required. For creating charge on assets, COC permission is required. If the resolution professional wants to amend or articles, the permission of COC is required. So there are many situations where COC permission is required, and COC is basically in the driver's seat. Now, as against this, in case of liquidation, there is no COC as such, although there is a committee that is formed, but the person in charge or the liquidator basically is the in charge, the person in charge of the whole process. So in resolution, the COC calls the shots, and in liquidation, the liquidator calls the shots. So it's a major difference. Now, unfortunately, as it happens, the committee of creditors would normally not include operational creditors. Unless a particular corporate debtor has no financial creditor at all, or it has financial creditors which are only related parties, then only the operational creditors can have a seat in the committee of creditors. So, which is one important issue which many operational creditors do not like. They're not happy. And if I am an operational creditor, of course, I don't like this provision that a particular company owes me money and I have no say in the particular matter. But that is how the provisions are right now. Whether it changes over a period of time or so, we have to see. Resolution professional basically has all the duties in terms of carrying out this particular resolution process. Now, resolution process carry out basically means on one side, the resolution resolution professional or the interim resolution professional has to collect the claims, has to collect and assess the claims, and make a list of these claims and categorize them in different boxes. That is one. Secondly, the resolution professional also has to identify who are the debtors to this company, where is the money due from, and try and collect this money. So, for example, there will be some debtors to this company who have not paid yet. There are some deposits that this company may have made, and they can be collected. There are some, say, real estate. There's some property which is being occupied by somebody. It may have to be vacated. So resolution professional may have to carry out this process. And the third thing that the RP has to do is to find a buyer to this particular business. Now, finding a buyer basically is also a very regulated process. There are a lot of procedures in terms of how a buyer is to be found and so on. So there is a public interest of expression of interest to be invited. After the expression of interest, there has to be a resolution plan to be invited from interested parties and so on. The resolution professional also has to get valuation done for this company. So it's a well regulated and a systematic process. So essentially the resolution professional invites expression of interest from multiple people, and out of those who show a serious interest, and based on the criteria that the committee of creditors have developed, he will provide further information to those parties. And in of interest, so if you are buying a company, if you are trying to acquire a company under this code, you have to first show and file an expression of interest. Once an expression of interest is filed and the resolution plan shortlists your expression of interest, the resolution professional will share more information with you. You can even go and visit the particular factory and office and operations and so on, and collect further information. And then you have to submit a resolution plan within the time prescribed. Now, out of these resolution plans, the committee of creditors will decide which resolution plan is best. The code also provides a lot of criteria in which how a resolution plan has to be created and what are the criteria for accepting a particular resolution plan. Once these criteria are satisfied, the committee of creditors may recommend one resolution plan to NCLT. So the COC and RP will recommend one resolution plan to the NCLT, and NCLT will evaluate it not from the commercial angle.
Afraji,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we can't see your screen.
Yeah, I made it blank.
You made it blank?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But thanks for the feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
thank you.
The resolution plan will have to meet certain criteria. First of all, the criteria will be set by the code itself. Then also sets certain criteria, and then one approved plan will be submitted to NCLT, National Company Law Tribunal, and NCLT may approve or reject that plan. Once it is approved, the particular buyer then becomes responsible and also is entitled to take charge of the assets of the company and proceed as per the resolution plan. So making this resolution plan is also a process which is time bound, and it also has a lot of compliances involved. There are a lot of procedures and compliances involved in the particular process. But having done that, I think it can be a good opportunity for many participants in this particular TISA group. If in case you're looking for growth by acquiring companies, this can be a good time. And because of Corona and so on, the valuations of the companies probably are a little lower than what they normally would be. So that's the overall resolution process for corporates. I'm not getting into the percentages and the details of the timelines and so on. But maybe a few words about the resolution plan. A resolution plan is basically a detailed action plan, a detailed strategy of a particular buyer who is looking to acquire this business. Now, this plan will basically indicate how much money will be paid to different creditors, financial creditors, operational creditors, including employees and workmen, how much money will be paid to the government authorities for the government dues, other creditors, preference shareholders, and equity shareholders, if at all they are going to get any money. The resolution plan will also talk about how the company will be run going forward. Because NCLT is rather particular about this issue, that there have been some applications to acquire a company under insolvency and sell it out after 1 or 2 years by maybe adding some value. NCLT does not recommend it, NCLT does not accept it. They basically look at potential buyers or resolution applicants who are most likely to make a success on their own or who will run this company on their own. So that's one important point that NCLT is looking at. So frivolous applications, which are basically I'm acquiring it for real estate and then I will sell it after 1 year and so on, they are typically not accepted by NCLT. Because the objective of the code is to continue running these businesses as ongoing businesses so that the employees have jobs and the economy of the particular area continues. Couple of interesting and important points. One is who can be a resolution applicant. So there are a lot of conditions. There have been cases where the original promoters of this company, which went under insolvency, they tried to acquire their own company. So if there is a company called A and that I am a promoter of this company, now this company has defaulted, it goes to NCLT. After it goes to NCLT, I only try to acquire this company by either on my own name or by under somebody else's name. And the advantage for me is if my total debt was 100 rupees, after acquisition and after the resolution process, the debt may be 50 rupees or maybe even 20 rupees. So that I can continue running this company. The code basically prohibits the promoters of the company. The code also prohibits those entities who have insolvent companies within their own group. Of course, the particular section 29A is rather complicated. And I mean, just to explain 29A may take at least half an hour. So I'm not going into those details. Basically, those resolution applicants, so those companies who do not have companies under resolution or SIC companies or NPA companies under their own fold, either holding companies, subsidiaries, or network of subsidiaries, only they can apply. If somebody is a promoter of a company which has under resolution and that resolution has not been done satisfactorily, certain time has not elapsed after this resolution, then even those companies will not be eligible to acquire companies under this scheme. So the NCLT objective basically is there is no backdoor entry for people who have defaulted and would like to acquire those companies once again. So that's a pretty interesting 29A provisions. Now, it's very, very important section. But prior to this, let me speak. Okay, I'm blanking my screen again. My screen is blank right now. Let me talk a little bit about the liquidation process. Now, liquidation process is invoked when the committee of creditors or NCLT, they are convinced that this company cannot be sold as a going concern. So, for example, in cases where there is no resolution plan coming up, no party is interested in buying this company, or whatever plans that you have got are not practical, they are unlikely to happen, or there is possibility of defrauding of creditors. In some cases, in insolvency, we are seeing that the company has no assets at all. So whatever has been on the books is practically non-existing. Either there is nothing on the books, or if there is something existing on the books, in reality, in physical assets, there is nothing. So in such cases, there is no point in proceeding with the sale of the assets or sale of the company. COC or NCLT, COC may recommend to NCLT, and NCLT may announce that this company be liquidated. Also, a company is liquidated when there is no resolution plan within the time limits. As I said, there is a strict time limit, 270 days plus 90 days, plus any extension that due to corona or such reasons. If there is no resolution plan that could be submitted to NCLT, there is a compulsory liquidation of this company. So this company will be compulsorily liquidated. You cannot say that, no, we'll wait for 10 more days and we are expecting some resolution plan. No. If the time is up, the company has to be compulsorily liquidated. So that's the liquidation start. The committee of creditors may recommend and appoint a liquidator. Essentially, the NCLT appoints liquidator. The COC may recommend. And the liquidator takes charge of the assets of the company. The liquidator once again looks at the claims. So who are the financial creditors? What are the securities offered to these financial creditors? Who are the operational creditors, and so on. And then starts selling these assets one by one. Now, a liquidator is also expected to try and see if there is a possibility of selling this company as a going concern. So the liquidator may continue running the particular operation for a while, if there is an operation running. But in most cases, the objective of appointing a liquidator is to sell the assets, recover the money, and disburse the money as per the law. Now, what does the law say about disbursement of money? Whatever money has been received is disbursed in this particular sequence. So this sequence is very important. Insolvency resolution process cost and liquidation process cost. So whatever cost has been incurred while resolving the insolvency. So for example, any electricity bills, any legal fees, the expenses related to running a particular factory, expenses related to liquidation process. So for example, you invite bids. Liquidation is basically an auction kind of process. You invite bids, you conduct certain auctions. So those process costs, the employee cost during insolvency resolution and liquidation process, they will be treated as insolvency resolution process cost and liquidation process cost. So there are elaborate definitions for everything. After paying these costs, if money is left, then the workman's dues for 2 years and secure money due to secure creditors which are not relinquished. Now this is little complicated. So let me try to simplify this by saying if there is a secured creditor, a bank has given loan to a company and there is a security involved, there may be property or machinery that has been given to the particular creditor as a security. Now, in this case, the creditor has two choices. The creditor can say, I am selling my assets independently. So if there are a few machines which are under security to a particular bank, the bank may say, let me sell these machines separately on my own, and whatever money I will recover, I will recover. Now, if he recovers money more than what is the debt due to him, he has to pay the liquidator. If he recovers less money, then he joins the second category. Then he joins the third category. The second choice that a creditor has, say bank has, the bank says, okay, I am relinquishing my security. I'm relinquishing my security, and with my security relinquished, I'm joining the category 2. So category 2 is sum total of workman dues and secured creditors. Let me correct it. It is relinquished. Okay. So, okay. So secured creditor, as I said, there are two choices. One is they can relinquish security, which means they join all other secured creditors. When they do not relinquish, it basically means that they will sell their assets independently. Now, when they do not relinquish, there are a lot of conditions. If the same asset is secured with two loans, say bank A and bank B, and bank A says that will not relinquish, bank B says that will relinquish, then there is a complication. Then the bank which is saying that will not relinquish cannot go independently. Although under SARFAESI there is a provision that if you have more than 65% of the debt due, then you can. I will say that I mean on this matter there's no final answer on this. Some cases are still being litigated in this respect. So workman dues for 2 years and secured creditors. Workman dues are as defined under the Companies Act, and the Companies Act once again refers to it again refers to the Industrial Relations, that is Industrial Disputes Act. So there are Industrial Disputes Act, of course, is now under Industrial Relations Code. So we have to refer to Companies Act as well as to the Industrial Relations Code. The third category, if any money is left, then the third category is employees claim only for 1 year. Then there is unsecured creditors. Then there is government dues. Then the government dues along with those banks where the debts were secured but relinquished. This again let me correct, but not relinquished. So if bank has not relinquished and they have sold, let's say the machines worth 500 rupees, their loan amount was 700 rupees. They recovered 500 rupees from selling these assets. They still have 200 rupees claim on this company. Now this claim will come here. This claim will come here. But as against 700 rupees, if they recover 900 rupees, they will have to pay 200 rupees to the liquidator, so that money is available for insolvency resolution process and category 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. Then we have the category of other debts. Other debts can be really anything. Recently, there was a case that lease property or lease accommodation is not considered as operational debt, and therefore it will not be a part of the financial credit. or even the operational credit. So it becomes a part of the part of other debts or other loans. Now, as unsecured creditors, typically our suppliers will fall here, category number 4. Unsecured creditors under section 53 of the Act will fall here. So if we get any money after these people have been paid, insolvency resolution process, 2 years of workman dues, secured creditors who have relinquished their charge, employees for 1 year, and then it's our number. Now, this is under liquidation, of course. Under if you're still under insolvency, the resolution plan may provide for paying everything to all these entities. So if there is a resolution of the particular creditor, it is possible that the unsecured creditors may get some money. In case of liquidation, after payment of the first 3 categories, there is hardly anything left for unsecured creditors, that is suppliers. And therefore, even for supplier perspective, insolvency resolution is always a better idea. And insolvency resolution is where your business is also likely to continue, because somebody will buy this company and they will have you'll have continuing business with this company. After the other debts, if any money is left, preference shareholders will get it, and if something is left, equity shareholders will get it. That's the overall story sequence in terms of the what we call waterfall mechanism under IBC. Section 53, and this is of course under liquidation, but this has an impact on insolvency resolution. When you submit an insolvency resolution plan, if you're acquiring a company, you have to pay at least that amount of money which any entity will get under liquidation. So for example, you offer some money for workman dues, you offer some money for employees, but you offer nothing for unsecured creditors. Now, in such cases, that may not get accepted, because it is possible that if the company were hypothetically go to liquidation, the unsecured creditors may get some money. And as I said earlier, the resolution professional will also get valuation of the assets done. So if the valuation shows that unsecured creditors can get say 100 rupees, and if you offer them only 80 rupees, that kind of plan will not be accepted. So although this waterfall mechanism is under the liquidation process, it will still have some impact, some implications for the insolvency resolution process. Now I'm looking at the time now. So it's about 5:25 right now. Samir?
Yes, sir. Yes,
sir. I'll close down in about 5-7 minutes.
Okay, sure.
Cool. I'll close in about 5-7 minutes, and then we'll have some questions, if any. Yeah. So I mentioned 3 points. Why is it important for us to understand this? I had mentioned 3 points, so let me answer those 3 points now. Possible remedies when a customer is not paying or is unable to pay. You can bring action by sending notice under section 8. But for doing that, we have to ensure that the threshold limit is satisfied, which is 1 crore right now. There is no pre-existing dispute. And the notice is sent as per the format. Procedures have to be complied with. So there is a format, there is a copy that has to be served to the corporate debtor also, and so on. The authorities are very particular that this code should not be used as a pressure tactic, and I think there have been some situations. So whenever there is a genuine default, customer is really unable to pay, this remedy can be utilized. But we have to start by sending a notice under section 8. If there is no offer of payment, or if there is no claim of any prior dispute, then we have to make an application to NCLT under section 9. Secondly, and I think this is a big opportunity for us, the growth of your business by acquisitions. It's a great time to acquire businesses. As I said, because of Corona and so, the valuations are likely to be pretty low. We have to be on the lookout for opportunities. Those announcements are made from time to time, as I said, public announcements. But while doing this, we have to adhere to time limits, and we need to follow the code and regulations for developing a resolution plan. As I said, there are a lot of requirements under the code and regulations and rules of the code that have to be followed to be a successful bidder for a particular insolvency case. This can be a good opportunity in case, because I think Corona has created a lot of trouble. Corona has also created a lot of opportunities, and those cases can be looked at as a potential growth for us. The advantage is, one big advantage is if a particular company has 100 crores as money that it owes to its creditors, under this it may be available for 60 crores or 50 crores or even lower. And which is why earlier banks were not willing to take a write-off. I mean, wherever I personally have tried to acquire companies, there was, for example, there was a company that had a loan of 50 crores. And those lenders were simply not willing to take a cut. And my client was willing to pay them 25 crores. And they said, here's a check for 25 crores. You write off everything else. And we started a company running from tomorrow on a clean slate. Now, earlier, the banks were not open to this kind of proposition at all. So they would wait for ages under the company law. As I said, even 20 years, nothing happens, no money to be seen. So even after 20 years, they after 50 crores, if they would be lucky if they got to get 10 crores. But they would refuse an offer to take 25 crores now and forget it and write off everything else. Now this is happening. Now this is happening with the banks. They realize that it is prudent idea to close a particular NPA, take whatever money you can get right now, and then move on. This also applies to legal or the statutory dues. If a company owes, say, there is a VAT demand and there is excise demand and so on. Under this, the company that is acquiring this business is acquiring on a clean slate. It's a clean, once you have paid whatever has to be agreed, whatever has been agreed under the resolution plan, that is all you need to pay. Everything else is written off. There's no further claim, at least for the historical period. Till the time you take over the company, whatever has happened is closed once you have done your job in terms of whatever has been agreed in the resolution plan. And that is the best part of it. This can help you acquire a company quickly. Of course, there's a lot of legwork. There are a lot of things that we have to do to turn around a company. There will be a lot of statutory challenges. For example, you have to transfer the factory license in your name. You have to transfer a lot of approvals in your name and so on. But that procedure can be done in 1 year. We have 1 year after the acquisition of the company for doing all that. So it's a fairly, I think, straightforward situation and fairly good situation compared to, at least compared to what provisions were earlier. And thirdly, what to do if you get a notice under IBC? I mean, if you are defaulted and if not paid, first of all, you need to confirm if the claim is within the Limitation Act. Now, insolvency law basically overrides everything else except the Limitation Act. Insolvency law provisions override other acts like even Companies Act and Partnership Act and so on, except the Limitation Act. So Limitation Act does apply to any loans that or any debts that are owed. Then see if there is any pre-existing dispute. As I said, we cannot raise a dispute later, and you can even offer to settle because there is a 10 days time given and so on. Even after making an application, so if somebody makes an application to NCLT for insolvency resolution, that application also can be withdrawn under certain conditions. But those conditions, of course, are fairly detailed ones, so I'm not getting into those details. But an application can be withdrawn even at a later stage, up to a certain point. So if you get a notice and if the debt is genuinely due, and if you're not paid it, might as well settle it. So that's the, these are the three main points that I thought I will mention in terms of the implications for different companies. And my objective, of course, was not to get too much into the legality of it, because the legalities do require a specialized knowledge and a lot of attention and focus. A lot of amendments are coming every day, a lot of cases are coming every day. But my objective was to help TISA members who are running some kind of businesses to be, first of all, aware of what is the code and what could be the implications of the code for them, and particularly where they can take this as an opportunity to growing their business. Samir, over to you. Any questions, any thoughts? Sonali?
Thank you, Fraser. Today in this program, we have our managing committee member, also Mr. Roshan Keval Ramani. Roshan ji, can you hear me? Hello, Roshan ji, can you hear me? Anyway, I think Roshan is offline. Good evening, everyone. Hello, Mr. Roshan.
Yeah, Mr. Sonawne, you can go ahead. Jay Nair here. We can hear you.
Yeah, Jain ji. Very good evening. Very good evening, everyone. I'm honored and lucky to have the opportunity to give vote of thanks for today's program on IBC.
So Sonali ji, any questions you will have?
So no, on behalf of TISA, we have no questions since I think already
Okay.
our members have mentioned everything. So if any members is having question, they can ask Afreji. He is ready to answer all the questions if any.
And you have my number on the screen, of
Malvika
course, you
ji
can-
from Punjab, we have our Mohali Industries Association secretary.
Mhm.
Malvika madam.
हाँ जी सर, गुड
Yeah,
इवनिंग।
good evening. Are you having any questions related to this topic?
No, not right now, sir. But then I wanted to know that the outstanding amounts which, which like not paid by the defaulter units, the timeline is still that 45 days, and only then we can proceed with the all the paperwork.
Afresh please.
Good question, Malavika ji. Let me mention this by, first of all, the money has to be due to you.
Right.
Now, if your agreed term is 45 days, then it is definitely not due for 45 days.
Yes.
This is one. Secondly, the NCLT and authorities also do not like if somebody is using this as a pressure tactic.
Okay. Okay.
You get my point. So
Yes.
after 45 days, you need to give them some chance. You may have to remind and so on.
Okay.
Because even a frivolous case, there can be a penalty on the person applying.
Okay. But then,
Okay.
sir, that usually these cases are taken up by the MSC facilitation councils. These
Yeah. So the first stage for you, the first stage for you is MSME facilitation center.
Okay. Right. Right.
That is the first stage. And IBC will be a very, very serious step. Because see, after IBC, what happens?
Yes.
After IBC is involved, after insolvency is initiated for a particular company,
Yes.
the board of directors is suspended.
Okay. Right.
The company owners, board of directors, whosoever it is, they are suspended. They will have no authority even to sign a check.
Right.
All the authority will lie with the resolution professional or interim resolution professional.
Right.
Yeah. So this is a very, very serious activity. Very, very serious activity.
Yes. So that this
First exhaust all the other options.
yeah. So this is what
So first you may have, first you may have reminders, you may have some kind of legal notices,
Yes.
you may have MSME facilitation center, you may approach arbitration.
Yes.
Try those steps first. Yeah.
Right, because what happens is that most of the companies they have a working relationship already with these vendors. So they
Yeah.
don't want to spoil that relationship also. They want to continue
Yeah,
work.
that is true. That is true.
Ah.
Yeah, you would like to continue business. So
Yes.
you would like to, you don't want, even banks basically have that thought process. See,
Yes.
bank also has a long-term relationship with the client.
Right.
So banks also will do it as a last resort. When nothing else is happening,
Exactly.
nothing else is working out, this is what they will do. Yeah, because banks also have a long-term relationship with all their borrowers.
Okay. Right.
So this long-term relationship contain. I mean, this principle applies to everybody, and
Yes.
even banks will not casually do it. So they first have to classify it as NPA, the reminders, and then there are a lot of other processes.
Right.
But make sure that you do it within the Limitation Act.
Right. Sure, sir.
Hmm.
Sure.
After Limitation Act, the NCLT will say no, this is time barred debt. You cannot do it now.
Exactly. Right. Thank you so much, sir.
So this is the last resort. I mean,
Yeah,
this is not a special tactic tool at all. Yeah.
True. Thank you so much, sir.
Welcome.
Afraji,
Ji,
there is
sir.
one question or the one query has been posted through chat.
Yeah.
Can you please refer to
Okay,
it?
let me take a
It
look.
is by Mr. Parag Prabhudesai. Yeah, he's basically asking that in case the materials or goods are being supplied and during installation there is some dispute.
Hmm.
An order is in the stage of execution and not being executed, but it is under execution. So that
Okay.
can be treated as dispute under the IBC procedures, where a debtor can raise a dispute.
Is there a default? Is there a default of payment?
Mr. Parag,
Yes.
Paragji, is there,
Yeah. Good evening, everybody.
good evening, sir.
Yeah. So dispute. The case is here is that the multiple orders are going on. There are number of say 4-5 executions going on, and it includes the supply, installation, and commissioning. So
Okay.
so say for example there are 3 sites which has to be going on, and at one site there is the problem is during the installation or commissioning we did not if we don't get the results expected, and so
Okay.
the payments are not done and the supplier is not responding, so we have to get it done because it's our commitment to the customer, it's our supplier, and then it's a link. So yes,
Right.
legally speaking you can say the payment is hold on, but it's all documented, sent on email and this thing that unless this is done, this is not done. And there is also dispute that supplier says it is not in
Performance.
scope. So still,
Okay.
can this treated be as a dispute or how?
Yes, this will be a dispute. But let me also mention to you one thing that NCLT will not go into the merits of the dispute.
Okay.
Whether the dispute is genuine or whether the matter has to be decided from the supplier side or customer side, NCLT will not get into it. NCLT just will see basically there is a dispute and it's a dispute existing prior to this application, and it's not a dispute raised later on. So NCLT basically will not go into the merits of the dispute. So and NCLT will not see whose fault it is. Is it your fault or is it your customer's fault or is it your supplier's fault?
Okay.
NCLT will not get into it.
No, so it is treated as a dispute and it won't be entertained. Do you mean to say?
No, it is a dispute. When there is a dispute, the application from the operational creditor will be rejected.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, the application from the operational creditor will be rejected if there is a dispute existing. And whether the dispute has to be whether you are right or somebody else is right, NCLT is not getting into it. Either go to arbitration or go to some other court for that purpose.
But how, sir? Sorry
to your remedy will have to approach a court in case that is a
yeah. But then how does they know whether it's a genuine dispute? Because
so who no NCLT is not going to worry about it. NCLT will see dispute, yes, application rejected, end of story. Okay. So you may have to approach arbitration, get an award or something.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Now, once the award is decided in your favor, and still the customer is not paying, then you can approach IBC saying that there is no dispute now because the dispute has been settled by this arbitration, and therefore please accept this application.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. All right, any other thoughts, sir?
There is one more question.
Sir.
Mr. Anand Afre is asking who are excluded from applicability of IBC?
Okay, basically financial services. So it doesn't apply to banks. It applies to NBFCs to a limited extent. The financial services businesses, basically the code doesn't apply. RBI governs them, and which is why it doesn't apply. NBFCs, yes, I mean you have heard the case of this. I think HDIL, or Housing Development Finance Company. I think it was some PNB bank or some case.
PMC Bank. Right?
Yeah, and I think there was this. So in those cases, yes, but purely banks and financial services companies, it doesn't. Yeah, thanks, Anand.
Thank you, sir, for
Welcome.
giving very nice presentation on IBC. The topic is very new for all, but you have given in very simple language. On behalf of TISA, we are very much thankful to you, Afreji. And today it looks that many people are from beside industrial fraternity, educationalists are there, professionals people are there. So I'm very much thankful to all of them. This TISA is 44 years old organization. This is for those who are not member of TISA. TISA is 44 years old organization working for the development of industries. We update them time to time on various amendments happen at central and state level. We keep them updated every time. On behalf of TISA, I am very much thankful to our Afreji. Samir has already given Afre's introduction. So he has given very nice presentation today to all of our members. And before concluding, we are very much thankful to him. Thank you all. Thank you, Professor.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Eknathji. And thanks, Samir. Bye from my side.
Yes, sir. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.